Indeed, we had this moment yesterday. DeepSeek is just an example where some slightly older technology was used to jump the gun on much more advanced technology. Does that say to us that export controls need to be tightened, or China's just outsmarting us when it comes to these programs?
I think it sort of says neither, and a little bit of both. I know it sounds strange,
Okay.
but on the one hand, we're seeing that China is able to do more than we thought with less than we are willing to give them. So in that sense, it was a surprise. On the other hand, imitation is not innovation. So we are seeing the export controls have an effect, as Greg Allen said yesterday on Bloomberg. And I'm sure there's a lot of thought being given in Washington tonight about whether export controls need to be tightened in some ways, expanded in others. But still, we are seeing the effect of export controls in that the Chinese were forced to do a lot with less.
Is this something the Trump administration should be leaning into, particularly when it comes to manufacturing equipment for chips, the things that we're talking about that we already can't buy or China cannot buy from NVIDIA? Or should he be leaning more into the tariff approach, which he talks so much about?
Well, export controls will clearly be on the menu. And I think a key issue will be trying to prevent routes for circumvention of the existing controls. The Biden administration made some changes to the controls very recently. We have to see how those are working. But there will be, in some sense, doubling down on the controls that we do have and seeing if we need to expand them further. On the tariff front, I really think that that's not so much about technology at the forefront. The question is going to be whether we're going to see more decoupling of sort of ordinary or everyday technology, chips that are not at the frontier. Will we be trying to tax Chinese-made chips that go into devices that are assembled in other countries, for example? So there were many people today talking about whether tariffs on Taiwanese chips would affect the iPhone. But, those chips don't come directly to the United States. They go to other locations for production, as they do in so many other products. So tamping down on those or taxing those chips that are built into other products is just a whole nother order of magnitude of difficulty in terms of taxing and then preventing rerouting. So there really has to be more explanation as to what the national security justifications for these are, I think, especially in light of what happened with DeepSeek, because Americans want to know, what are we gaining for these actions?
Well, that's fascinating as we kind of broaden our scope then on the United States relationship with China to other elements here. And you consider the global struggle, if you will, in the eyes of the Trump administration that's happening right here in this hemisphere with eyes on Panama, for instance. I spoke on the early edition of Balance of Power with Rob Waters, a managing partner, founder of the Madison Group. Here's what he had to say about China's global actions that seem to be prompting this response.
China in itself has violated the Monroe Doctrine, and we are just seeing it step by step, both in the Panama Canal. We're seeing it in Latin and South America. We're seeing it, with AI. We are seeing where they are head-to-head competing with us. And how do we control that other than, export control and tariffs?
Back to export controls and tariffs, Mary, where we started our conversation. Panama is going to be the first stop, or one of the first stops, that Marco Rubio, the new Secretary of State, makes on his first trip representing this administration. What's the message?
Well, I think it's good that Marco Rubio is going. He has a lot of foreign policy experience and a broad view on China's role in the global economy. I'm sure his message will be, we want you on our side, and there are dangers to, getting too far integrated with China. We can't say integrating with China because China's already in Latin America. There is a danger of thinking that we're back 100 years ago or so and we can control other countries. That simply isn't true. Even tariffs and threats of the type that we saw against Colombia most recently are unlikely to really do the trick and may in fact backfire on the United States in terms of driving countries deeper into integrating with China.
Fascinating. Well, the Monroe Doctrine that Rob Waters talks about brings us back more than 100 years. That's 1823. What does China think of the Monroe Doctrine?
Yeah, I know. I think there's a big danger in that. And it's U.S. is a large, powerful country, full stop. But there are limits. Other countries are sovereign nations, and there has to be a positive game to this as opposed to just threats. What is the U.S. going to do to ensure that these countries are willing to engage with us, are willing to face up and assist us with the challenges that we're seeing in dealing with a more aggressive China? Where are the positive trade, investment, infrastructure moves that the U.S. is going to make? We saw the Biden administration talk about such moves. Unfortunately, the reality was rather weak tea. It's something that needs to be on the menu.
Well, you talk about Colombia and the brief trade war we had during lunch on Sunday. Now that this has happened, have we shown our cards in this case? Can the Trump White House play that hand again? Or will it next be about implementing tariffs and removing them when certain conditions are met?
Well, Colombia is a small nation. It is dependent on trade. We're not its largest export destination anymore. But, there's a limit to how far these things can go. There is this, demonstration effect. Let's try this, and then we'll show the world that we mean business. For small countries, where surely it will gain some traction. For larger countries, surely not. And over the longer cycle, it's basically telling other countries, international businesses, that the U.S. will act erratically, it will act in its own interests, and that it's better to work around the U.S. rather than with the U.S. So I think there's serious long-term questions about exactly how the U.S. is not just putting itself first, but making itself a leader versus isolating itself by pushing other countries away